The exploration into male vulnerability and emotion on screen has long been the obsession of many a filmmaker or scriptwriter. The heart of the artist can be seen in their work. Emotion on screen of all kinds is a powerful thing, and the male-dominated persuasion of much of cinema has lent the medium to deeply discuss the themes of male emotions and relationships since the invention of the camera. Before, even, with filmmakers of the last century and a half adapting on the ideas of those that came before them. The Lord of the Rings, in a novel, explores the toils and treasures of male friendship and fellowship in the face of war, only to be adapted and analysed further throughout the years. In animation, live action, in musicals, Victor Hugo's vision of Jean Valjean and Javert fighting through France across the years, connected by fate and vengeance, is re-explored through song and theatre. That theatre experience filmed, and film and television adaptations asunder. The twisted relationship of Flint and Silver in Stevenson's Treasure Island, re-examined 100 years later in Black Sails. Visual mediums are not better for portraying emotion. On-screen portrayals of said emotion are, however, undeniable when the audience's eye is brought so close to the subject, when it is not left up to one's imagination alone. The beauty of the camera is that it often sees that which we cannot, and when exploring emotion, the mediums of film and television can be particularly helpful, for that which is so swiftly repressed in the real world is often easier to explore and exaggerate through art, and the camera often serves as a light, illuminating the darkest parts of the soul, shining so brightly it is hard to ever look away. Hello, my name is Mage, and welcome to Black and White Thinking, and specifically, welcome back to my Bi Tropes series, where I take a common and repeating bi image from television, I look at specific character examples related to said trope, and I talk about how bi representation can relate to bi people's real and daily lives. I have not updated this series in a year, but here we are. My apologies. Moving swiftly on. Today's video is one for the boys. The soft boys, specifically. This video will contain a lot of pining, homoeroticism, and heavy breathing, as we take a look at how bisexual men are portrayed on screen. Specifically, bisexual or bi-coded men with intense, obsessive relationships with other dudes, a clearly defined sexual attraction to women, and obvious and perhaps severe mental health issues. So let me break it all down. If you enjoy this video or find it helpful in any way, please consider subscribing to the channel, checking out my other videos, and writing or sharing it with your friends. Every little helps and all that, and I appreciate it with my whole heart. Also, if there's anything bisexual you want to see me cover, just let me know at one of the links below. Thank you, as always. So, hi guys, I'm very happy to invite you back to my series on bisexual tropes on television. This series does what it says on the tin, diving into and attempting to dissect bisexual tropes in television and their impact generally on bisexual people in real life, and whether or not these tropes wander into cliché territory. And no, all the tropes I discuss in this series have come from my own twisted mind, and through chats with friends. So if you don't agree with me, that's totally cool, and I would love to know why in the comments. The trope I want to discuss today is one I have labelled the soft bi boy. A trope I believe exists on a spectrum of emotion, medium, and time, from the Epic of Gilgamesh all the way down to Frodo and Sam, continuing forward to the homoeroticism of modern boy bands. This trope, that can definitely be subcategorized, tends to be made up of similar components, in my opinion, that once seen are hard to unsee. These elements tend to be a man who is bi, or bi-coded, bi-implied, bi-tinged, one may say, who probably has an intense, semi-platonic, semi-homoerotic relationship with another man, who is often also bi or bi-coded. They will also usually have a defined attraction and relationships with women. They are almost always mentally ill, severely traumatized, or just a little psycho.
I wish you were dead!
So do I!
So, as always, let's dive into some examples from modern TV, explore some of the subcategories I mentioned, and discuss how male characters in the media interact with their bi-male counterparts in the real world. As I said previously, this trope, cliché, motif, archetype, whatever you want to call it, very much exists on a spectrum, and I believe it's been hanging around for thousands of years at this point, in some shape or form. One that is not only centered on the emotion of a man as an individual, but also one that focuses on the emotional depths of the relationships that men have with each other. A trope that should not be confused simply with the portrayal of male platonic friendships. Bi-masculinity in the media is a personal fascination of mine in queer theory. Bi men get a short straw socially, but there is an on-screen obsession with them, and I'm not even sure if the usually straight people with said obsession are aware of it. It harkens back to the conversation about the bisexual paradox of invisibility I discussed in the last video in this series. Bi men, at least bi coding, is everywhere, and the soft bi boy is everywhere. A simple way of looking at this motif would be to ponder, is he bisexual or does he just have a lot of feelings? Are these two men going to kiss or are they going to cry together? Both is the ideal response, but a lot of the characters we will talk about in this video are not both. They are, as I said, bi-tinged and very rarely allowed to cross from the implicit into the explicit. Mr. Robot, first airing in 2015 and created by Sam Ishmael, is a hard show to explain without spoiling it. It follows a hacker named Elliot Alderson who is trying to destroy the megacore he works for from the inside out with a ragtag ensemble around him. Elliot is also deeply mentally ill, as is everyone around him. Mr. Robot is also a show where almost everyone is bi, even though no one says it. The cast is made up of queer, explicitly or coded characters, male and female. Mr. Robot has a particularly bisexual way of expressing character emotion, and Elliot is singularly one of the most obvious examples of this motif in action, in my opinion. Elliot checks every box. He is bi-coded. He has an equally intense relationship with Angela, who herself is shown to have relationships with men and women, as well as with Tyrell, who himself is shown to have relationships with men and women. Tyrell himself very much adheres to this structure too. However, his bisexuality is made visible on screen through physical intimacy with both men and women. Elliot's never is. Both characters are mentally ill in different ways, but the two have an incredibly intense bond, beyond brotherhood, but only ever walking up to the line of explicit queerness.
I believe in fate. There's a reason we met. There's something between us. I can see it.
Although Elliot's intense relationships are almost all with queer people who are shown to be queer on screen, he himself is never shown to, say, kiss another man on screen. His relationship with Tyrell is many things, but never consummated. And this is a choice by Ishmael, because many other characters are shown to be explicitly queer through Mr. Robot. Most of the other characters in Mr. Robot are queer. The central male figure of the show is somehow the exception to the rule. Here, Elliot serves as the perfect example of the is he bi or is he just sad idea. The question even remains after the show's ending. Bi male leads are risky, usually considered by Hollywood as unsellable unless easily marketed as a gag. See Lucifer for more details on that. Mr. Robot was a serious show about serious man feelings, and bisexuality in men is generally, and incorrectly, considered unserious, especially within the medium of television. There are a lot of questions easily asked about the presentation of masculinity, bi-masculinity, on screen that arise through seeing this trope. Another male who is almost identical in all of these elements to Elliot would be Will Graham from Hannibal. The relationship between Hannibal and Will and the relationships between Elliot and Tyrell are comparable. So intense it's hard to read as anything but queer, but without ever actually being explicit in that queerness.
He said he forgave me.
Betrayal and forgiveness are best seen as something akin to falling in love.
One guy is softer and still savable, the other more psychopathic. Rust and Marty from True Detective, heck, even Goku and Vegeta. Interview with a Vampire is another example of this, the film specifically which purposely backtracks on queerness, leaving it in the air, lingering about between Cruz and Pip. Ragnar in Athelstan, and also Floki in Vikings. Ragnar is this tall, brooding, buff male lead of the show, who wears eyeliner and is a bit of a wife guy. Ragnar the character only really loves two people in his entire life. Lagertha, his first wife and love, and Athelstan, an English monk who he steals and falls for. But again, Vikings never goes there explicitly. The relationship between Ragnar and Athelstan is so gay and so intense.
I can no longer acknowledge your gods. I suppose it is better that I leave Kattegat now.
What do you mean you cannot leave? You cannot leave me! I love you. And you're the only one I can trust, so you must stay.
But Ragnar was too important in regards to being the masculine heart of the show for Hearst. Side note, he's a vile little writer if there ever was one. Hearst and other showrunners like him could not risk important male characters being seen as fruity. And the character of Athelstan, spoilers, physically pays the price for that. This isn't a Bury Your Gays video, but it very much could be. There's another element of this trope that I think's worth discussing, perhaps a little harder to define by such a strict measure. Characters that are coded as queer, bi, whilst being emotionally sensitive, a more sexless, slightly less mentally ill variant of the Elliots and Ragnars. Sam Evans of Glee comes to mind.
Hey everybody, I'm Sam. I am. And I don't like green eggs and ham.
As a character, Sam was originally written to be gay, but was quickly rewritten as straight when Cord Overstreet was cast in the role, and the writers of the show wanted to pair his character with Diana Agron's Quinn, instead of Chris Colfer's Kurt. Notoriously, bisexuality doesn't exist in Glee, and when it did, it wished it didn't. The script overhang, though, left Sam, the character introduced in season 2, feeling incredibly bi-coded. In a very stereotypical kind of way, he was written to be softer and mildly more effeminate than the other hetero-male characters. He was more considerate in his allyship.
Pretty cool that our girlfriends are such good friends, right? Wish you and I were that close.
Bob and Jean, both from Bob's Burgers, could easily be placed here. I should make a Glee video. I should make a video about how Jean Belcher is bi and trans. Anyway, Charlie in Perks of Being a Wallflower, Riker from The Next Generation even. It's also, to me, very reminiscent of how a lot of boy bands use masculinity to market themselves. As I said, male leads on TV are very often not allowed to be both bi and deep, only bi and funny, or straight and deep. However, all rules do tend to have their exceptions. And I'm going to take this opportunity to revisit a character briefly mentioned at the beginning of this video, and perhaps one of my favourite characters of all time. In 1882, the probably bi Robert Louis Stevenson published his novel Treasure Island, a book about a man named John Silver who is haunted by ghosts of the past, specifically an old friend of his called Flint and treasure they once buried together. In 2014, Black Sails aired on Starz, a show that explores the ghosts of Silver's past, with a story that includes both historical and fictional pirates, the characters of Treasure Island, as well as a bunch of the real-life so-called flying gang, Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, etc. Black Sails is a silly, imperfect show that I adore, full of misogyny and bisexuality. I love to hate it and I hate to love it. It's probably one of my favourite shows of all time, even with its flaws. The character of Captain James Flint is a large part of why I love the show. The show's male lead, joint male lead, is bisexual, and it's important. Other characters on the show, Black Sails, are bisexual too, much like Mr. Robot. However, where the male lead of Mr. Robot's bisexuality is toyed with, made emotional and invisible, easy to question, the male lead of Black Sails is recognisably bisexual, and his bisexuality plays a fundamental and important role in his story. It is not all his story, but it is not ignored or played down. It is, in Flint's case, where his joy lives. And even in a show as grim as Black Sails, as gory and gutless as it can be, Flint's bisexual romance being the heart of it, as well as the deep, emotional, aesthetically bisexual relationship that Flint and Silver have, with Flint being allowed to be both sad and deep, as well as bi and happy about that, that's really refreshing. In regards to the more sexless, sensitive characters of this subset, the less anti-hero, Batman and Joker-y version, a fairly refreshing depiction, I think, can be found in Nick, in Heartstopper. I know it's cool to hate Heartstopper at the moment. It's not really a story for me, and neither is it a perfect story, but Nick's character is Sam Evans without the shade of the writer's closeting hanging above his head. As far as reflection is concerned, bisexual men in the real world are more likely to suffer or be diagnosed with a severe mental illness than gay and straight men, but they are also less likely to be out than gay men to the people closest to them. There is a lot of stigma that exists for bi men. They are often framed as non-existent, and whilst I don't want to outrightly say that tropes such as this one hinder, I definitely don't see them helping. Bisexual people, but especially bi men, are often reported as feeling like being bi is not central to their identity, where their gay peers report the opposite, an arguable consequence of the double closet that affects bi people. For bi men, they need to conform to hetero norms that involve a specific type of masculinity, whilst also trying to find a way to express queer masculinity amongst queer peers. That's not an easy balancing act. This lack of identity can be seen bouncing between real bi men and the bi men on screen, who so perfectly encapsulate the loneliness that can come from not knowing quite where you fit in. All that being said, this trope can still often feel like a tool to explore masculinity within the safe boundaries of queerness, without ever actually having to allow for explicit queerness, which I would argue is a cop-out. Again, I don't want to argue that representation in the media is more important than so-called artistic expression. There is a required balance that no artist has really mastered, but to use that which is bisexual in your art and to not acknowledge it on some level will always remain a personal sore point for me, especially in a lot of these cases where we are not only talking about ambiguity, but also just being ignorant to what you are writing. I don't know them personally, but I'm pretty sure if I told Michael Hurst that Ragnar was bisexual, or if I said the same of Elliot to Ishmael, they would be like, nah, they're straight, buff boys with just like hella emotion. And that, I guess, is the point I'm making. Is this guy bi, or is he just sad? I think he can be both, and the more both, the better. Whilst discussing the Destiel queerbaiting drama within the infamous supernatural space, in her essay, Supernatural, Wincest and Dean Winchester's Bisexual Panic, found in the book Queerbaiting and Fandom, edited by Joseph Brennan, Emily E. Roach observes the following. Bisexuality remains one of the most misunderstood and invisible of sexualities, and male bisexuals often suffer from the demands of toxic masculinity and the oppression of boxes and binaries. Hannah Johnson comments that the queerbaiting that happens in Supernatural would probably not be so effective if it were not for the invisibility of bisexuality. She notes that the illusion of straightness is upheld by comments Dean makes about women, and that immediately co-sign Dean's interactions with men to the realm of comedy. She continues, if the intent in those moments of queerbaiting is to play with fans' reading of Dean as a closeted bisexual, it is in extraordinarily poor taste, when the double closet of bisexuality is one of the contributing factors to bisexuals being more at risk of depression and other mental health related issues than their lesbian or gay counterparts. In the same book, in her essay, Heterobaiting, Black Sails and the Subversion of Queerbaiting Tropes, Leah Carcass uses a quote from the character of Flint to discuss how we can illuminate queer stories. In flipping these tropes inside out, Black Sails raises questions of queer representation within historical narratives, and it opens up radical possibilities for people whose narratives have traditionally been kept in the dark. As Flint states in one of his speeches, in the dark there is discovery, there is possibility, there is freedom in the dark once someone has illuminated it. Black Sails constitutes one example of the possible stories that could emerge from illuminating those dark spaces of history. I'll play parts of the speech here.
This is how they survive. You must know this. You're too smart not to know this.
They paint the world full of shadows and then tell their children to stay close to the light. Their light. Their reasons, their judgments. Because in the darkness, there be dragons. But it isn't true. We can prove that it isn't true. In the dark, there is discovery. There is possibility, there is freedom. In the dark, once someone has illuminated it, and who has been so close to doing it as we are right now?
It's actually one of my personal favourite quotes in all of literature. A pivotal moment for the character of Flint. A speech that for me summarises his character arc and the entire thematic point of the show. And Daenerys. But as Carcass points out, it is a speech about finding queer light in the straight dark places, about identity and rebellion against that which oppresses it. And this seems to be a common theme with a lot of these characters. men of shadow looking for a flicker in the deep void. Bisexuality is so often the sexuality most shaded, hidden, renamed, erased, not addressed. And to build off what Roach said about Dean, it is easy to see how a disservice is being done to the bi community within these kinds of stories, even if and when the story is written well. When these motifs are repeated again and again without an application of critical thinking from the people using them, the trope risks becoming a cliche. Cliches in writing are not just boring, they are generally terrible for minority people across the board, who again often aren't looking for representation in their media, but for relatability, the way any consumer of any story would be. For a lot of non-bisexual creators, it often feels like sexual ambiguity and moral ambiguity are one and the same, and the less said about bisexuality, the less observations said writers have to make about queer theory in the work they have strived so hard to be seen as hetero. A lot of these characters still serve as no homo placeholders. Where many a bi-coded female character is over-sexualized, bi-coded men are very rarely allowed to take that specific step. Illumination of those so-called dark spaces that Kakas mentioned, that serves to only heighten a story, to make characters bolder and audiences broader. Thank you for watching this video, made by me, Mage, at Black and White Thinking. I hope this opens up some discussions in the comments. Do I sound like I'm talking total crap? Or do I sound like I'm onto something here? Is this a trope that you can recognise? Let me know. I spend a lot of time talking to myself. Thanks as always, guys. I hope you gained something from this one. Catch you all soon. Bye.